radical transcendence to immanence, a phenomenological reading of Levinas. Before starting, I would like to say that I have considered Levinas' early period of his thought till the year 1974, which includes the publication of his major work, Totality and Infinity, an essay on exteriority in the year 1961. Levinas' second period begins with the publication of Otherwise Than Being or Beyond Essence in the year 1974. During this period, Levinas began to give emphasis on the idea of immanence. This period in the development of Levinas' thought enabled him to conceive about the self from a deconstructive approach. This research is an inquiry into Levinas' notion of the divine from a phenomenological standpoint. Also inquires into Levinas' conception of the divine as a progressive movement from radical transcendence to immanence. It also inquires into the possibility of phenomenological description of trans-rational experience of the divine in the philosophy of Levinas. It includes and introduces the phenomenological language of trans-rational description. The present research includes terminologies such as revelation, epiphany, the face, the other, enigma, manifestation, signification, revelation, transcendence, etc. The idea of radical transcendence is a very important expression in the present investigation. The term radical in the present discussion means absolute or total. I have introduced the following phenomenological hermeneutical equivalences for the idea of radical transcendence. As the following: radical exteriority, infinite hoiter, absolute heteronomy, absolute heterogeneity, etc. The first chapter provides an explanation of the thesis statement, the research question, the review of literature, the methodology of the research, scope, and the objectives of this research. The thesis statement has two parts. First, part of the thesis statement states the Levinas' idea of the divine is a trans-rational experience. It progresses from radical transcendence to immanence. 2. The second part states that Levinas' contention of the divine is linked to responsibility that is awakened before and beyond the freedom, consciousness, and reason. About the research question, is it possible to substantiate or justify Levinas' phenomenology of the divine as a trans-rational experience? How does it progress from radical transcendence to immanence? How can it be meaningfully described in phenomenological language? The various dimensions of the aforementioned research question, number 1, how does Husserl shape his phenomenological method, and how does Levinas contextualize and evolve his philosophy in respect to the Husserlian and Heideggerian thinking? 2. What are the trans-rational implications of radical transcendence of the other and the divine in the thought of Levinas? 3. How does Levinas describe one's experience of the immanence of the divine as the primordial presence of the good in the self? Number 4. How can one meaningfully interface Levinas' notion of the divine as the good with Sri Aurobindo's idea of the divine as the Satchidananda? The authors who are helpful to develop Levinas's idea of the divine are listed here in this slide. The methodology adopts a phenomenological hermeneutical method. It describes Levinas's idea of the divine as a progressive development of the experience from absolute exteriority to interiority. It is discussed in the context of the Husserlian phenomenological philosophy and the Western rational tradition. This research adopts analytic, descriptive, comparative, and critical approaches. Scope. It indicates wider horizons for future phenomenological studies. It interfaces Levinas's phenomenology with the Indian philosophical tradition of Sri Aurobindo. It points to the inadequacy of the absolute assertion of rational demonstrability of moral codes and religious dogmas. Objectives. Number one, to discuss Husserl's and Heidegger's phenomenological development in order to better describe the trans-rational dimension of Levinas's phenomenology of the divine. Two, to describe Levinas's idea of radical transcendence of the other and the divine. Three, third objective, to examine Levinas's concept of the self as one for the other, as a pre-original ethical structure. Objective 4, to make an Indian interface of Levinas's idea of the divine as the experience of the good with Sri Aurobindo's idea of the Satchidananda. The second chapter, Levinas' thought in relation to Husserl and Heidegger. Husserl, while developing his phenomenology, has grounded his philosophy in the Cartesian rationalism, especially in the idea of cogito ergo sum, which is a clear and distinct idea, and in the Kantian transcendental philosophy and the transcendental subjectivity, and Brentano's descriptive psychology, the idea of consciousness and intentionality. This attempts to situate Levinas's phenomenology of the other in the context of Husserlian transcendental phenomena, as we have said. It also inquires into Husserl's indebtedness to Kantian transcendental philosophy, as we have mentioned. Levinas, on his way to develop his ethics, observed that Husserl's logical investigation, consisting of a unnecessary obsession of the intentionality, because Husserl conceives consciousness as that gives meaning to his object. Levinas' thought is not merely a critique of Husserl and Heidegger. It takes into account of the rich heritage of the Western philosophic history in order to situate his philosophy. The third chapter, Trans-rational phenomenological implications of radical transcendence of the other. We have the self, number one. Three, the other. Between the self and the other, there is an asymmetrical relation. That is called an ethical discourse. The self and other are absolutely unequal. And in this asymmetrical relation, there emerges the experience of the other. When we see number 4, the diagram, how ought to the self relate to the other? As absolutely other, as a master, beyond concepts, categories, and categories, beyond intellection, as beyond or transnoetic and noematic, beyond intentional or intentionality, or beyond reason. Levinas calls ethics as the first philosophy. It's a realistic and practical philosophy. Somebody says that this philosophy is not practical. When the self relates to the other, ethic occurs as we said. And when we see number 4, the other becomes another self to relate to me, relate to the self. So there is no point of exploitation. If the self relates to the other as a master, the other itself becomes a self, and I myself becomes an other. In this type of interpersonal relationship, the self has to adopt an attitude of servitude because the other has radical height. It implies that the other has absolute alterity, heterogeneity, heteronomy. The other is the stranger par excellence. The other is an enigma. This relation is beyond rationality or intentionality. These are the synonyms for absolute alterity, whatever is seen in the diagram number 4. The 4th chapter, we see the radical transcendence of the divine, its transcognitive implication. The self relates to the other as the master because the other has infinite height, and as the self relates to the other, and the other has the absolute height on the face of the other, the divine reveals. The divine reveals, number 3, as a trace, as a glimpse, or as a revelation. For the revelation of the divine on the face of the other, the self has to relate to the other as his master. This revelation of the divine comes as something beyond rationality or reason, beyond reason when we refer to Descartes, beyond categories when we refer to Kant, beyond relatedness or intentionality as we refer to Husserl and Brentano. More implications and meanings on the basis of this similarity. Levinas' notion of the radical transcendence of the divine, and we can compare Nietzsche's idea of the death of God, because Levinas' idea of the divine escapes all dogmas on the divine. It's impossible to make a dogma of the divine. And Nietzsche's the idea of the death of God is also the absolute denial of all the dogmas that were existing in the religion of his time. Both Levinas and Nietzsche radically criticized and denied the grand structures or systems of philosophy in order to give a new direction to future form of philosophizing. Both Levinas and Nietzsche denied the absolute claims of the Western philosophical traditions and history. Number 3, both Levinas and Nietzsche rejected the absolute rational and dogmatic claims in support of the divine as one of the most important claims of the Western ontological and metaphysical traditions. When we come to chapter 5, the phenomenological implications of the immanence of the divine. There we see that Levinas is not a philosopher of transcendence alone. Somebody criticizes him that he is only a philosopher of transcendence. He is also a philosopher of immanence. That is very clear and justified in this exposition. As I have mentioned in the beginning, there are two phases how Levinas develops his philosophy. In the first phase, the self relates to the other, and the divine reveals on the face of the other, and the divine is, and the other is totally exterior to the self. It's the first phase. This is we find in constructed self. The self becomes other. The self substitutes itself for the other. And the exterior divine becomes the good in the self. And this good in the self becomes the divine, is the divine. Still, in this inferiority of the divine in the self and the divine, or the self and the good are not identified. It is an immanence in transcendence. In order to establish this argument, Levinas makes use of technical terminologies such as proximity, paternity, solicitation, reality, ipsity, substitution, anarchical, pre-original, etc. The good becomes the responsibility for others, or the good or the divine in the self becomes ethical inspiration to do good for others, to take responsibility for others. While we do this, we also made an interfacing between Levinas' idea of the divine with Sri Aurobindo's idea of the Satchidananda. Spiegelberg, in his one of the most important books, The Four Phenomenological Figures, has mentioned about the phenomenological fertility of Sri Aurobindo's thought. And a deep study of Levinas and Sri Aurobindo's idea of the Satchidananda will make us help justify this contention. Levinas' self, or the divine as good in the self, is the principle that is responsible for ethics. When we come to Sri Aurobindo's integral philosophy, where he speaks about the cosmic evolution, the Satchidananda becomes or is the principle responsible for the cosmic evolution. Both are only experiential. The good, the divine in Levinas and the Satchidananda in Sri Aurobindo are only experiential, cannot be rationally understood. Their horizon is beyond reason, it is trans-rational experience. There are few things that can be deduced from this comparison to give further implication, application and fertility to the uniqueness of this research. Number one, Levinas and Sri Aurobindo speak about the idea of the divine in their respective philosophies. Both speak. Both philosophies speak about the immanence of the divine. For Levinas, the immanence of the divine in the self is the inspiration for ethics and responsibility. For Sri Aurobindo, the Satchidananda in the universe is the force that guides and controls the universe. Number four, Levinas and Sri Aurobindo speak about the possibility of an access to the divine in a trans-rational perspective. For Levinas, the divine resists every rational approach. Sri Aurobindo holds that as the universe reaches the level of the mind or intellect, it sees everything in the form of multiplicity. But when it reaches the level of supermind, the experiential level, it sees everything in the dimension perspective of unity. Number five, Levinas and Sri Aurobindo preserve an idea of radical infinity or transcendence of the divine. In the idea of both the philosophies, the divine and the self, or the divine and the universe are never get getting identified, they never get identified. It is an immanence in transcendence. Number 6. It is immanent in the self, but the divine is immanent in the self, but radically unidentifiable, as we have seen. Both the contentions of the divine affirm the idea of immanence with radical transcendence. Some contributions to the knowledge as a general conclusion. It introduces this study to a deconstructive approach to Husserlian and Heideggerian phenomenological perspectives. Levinasian questioning of Husserlian phenomenological ideas is indeed a deconstructive stance to the grand system or meta-narrative of transcendental phenomenology. There is a justifiable possibility of considering Husserlian aforementioned system as a grand system. This research has a reconstructive value in relation to Husserl's phenomenology. Levinasian phenomenology deconstructs the existing phenomenological philosophy of Husserl and Heidegger with an addition of an idea of trans-rational phenomenology. It is the first time in the history of phenomenology a phenomenon derives a trans-rational significance, and in order to exemplify the above claim, it is significant to consider the etymology of the term phenomenology. That means that will go in the later discussion. The deconstruction of Husserlian and Heideggerian phenomenological standpoint is a reconstruction of novel phenomenological possibility. Second, it justifies the idea of a progress of the divine from radical transcendence to immanence. It inquires into the idea of the divine as a progressive movement. Levinas's idea of the divine is a trans-rational experience of the epiphany that progresses to the experience of the good in the self, as we have seen. Now, there is a postmodern significance for the idea of transcendence on the basis of the present research. Levinas's idea of radical transcendence is a critique of the Western philosophical tradition. Levinas used the idea of transcendence in order to deconstruct and reject the idea of the transcendental in the Western philosophical tradition. Levinas' idea of transcendence has neither an ontological nor a rational meaning. This idea of radical transcendence is a deconstructive and a categorical denial of any rational approach in the history of philosophy. The transcendentalists were the dehumanized instruments that reduced the alterity of the other and the divine. Even though meanings replaced the meaning of the grand structures, the postmodern thinkers were still under the autonomy of rationality. Among the other postmodern thinkers, Levinas stands tall by the introduction of the idea of meta-rationality. Metaphysics. This research presents Levinas' idea of metaphysics as a critique to the Western metaphysical tradition. Levinas has given a new meaning to metaphysics. According to Levinas, metaphysics leads to a desire for interpersonal discourse and responsibility. Metaphysics is a radical questioning and a substitute for the metaphysical system of the traditional philosophical history. In Levinas' thought, metaphysics leads to an ethical existing as otherwise than being. Major limitations. The present study does not evaluate every philosopher who influenced Husserl to develop the phenomenological method and does not dwell upon every Husserlian and Heideggerian idea to which Levinas disagreed. It considers Levinas' claim of the Western philosophy and epistemological hegemony in general and does not analyze the history of the Western philosophy in details. The present study does not address the question regarding the philosophical reasons for Levinas to take a different angle to consider the divine as immanent in the self, as different from his early conventions. If needed, during discussion can be done. 4. It does not discuss every aspect of Sri Aurobindo's notion of the Satchidananda in his integral philosophy. Possible areas of further research. The present study invites further investigation into Levina's thought to find more relevance and coherence with other philosophical streams or thoughts. This research opens up vistas for future studies regarding religious fundamentalism and violence because of the absolute religious and moral claims. 3. Husserl began to develop the transcendental phenomenology as a presuppositionless science. It is therefore very significant to make further studies whether Husserlian idea of intersubjectivity and the ontology of the life world are presuppositions. Necessarily not, but can be discussed. The present study prepares a space for further inquiry into Nietzsche's atheism. Does it lead to a real denial of the divine? On the basis of this study, now we can develop further. 5. The meta-rational phenomenological standpoint broadens inquiry into the possibility of experience in entities other than human beings. Is there any possibility? 6. This research gives direction to make further studies of Sri Aurobindo's integral philosophy from a phenomenological standpoint. Repeat. This research gives direction to make further studies of Sri Aurobindo's integral philosophy from a phenomenological standpoint. Thank you.
The next is the question out by the examiner. So Saji, please take a seat here. Here. Yeah. Yeah. There you are.
Good morning, one and all. Special thanks to Thomas. Meeting him for a very, very long time. I think when I did my refresher course there with Thomas.
Yes. Can I ask a few questions?
No, not now.
Afterwards, no. I will have time
First
afterwards.
is the examiner.
Because after all these people have known
Yes.
Parampara.
As Army says, Parampara. Correct. In fact, I came to know Dr. Thomas through Dr. Balasubramanian long back in around. I think once I came for an interview there, and of course it didn't happen that interview. But anyway, thank you so much, sir, for coming here and giving me an opportunity to also listen to you maybe after some time. And in fact, for the Thomas, for Matthew was mentioning, who was a candidate that he'll be very tense before presenting. And now it's my turn to be tense because I'm to talk phenomenally in front of Dr. Thomas. So, actually, when I was told that Dr. Thomas is there, I said my job is listen because he is there. But anyway, we are, as part of the duty, we have been assigned some task, and based on that, we need to do some work for that. Of course, Dr. Thomas is there to correct all of us here. Now, the candidate has done a very good job comparing Levinas, Heidegger, Husserl. And I should admit one thing, when I came to Satyanyam way back in 1986, at that time I came to teach the 5 systems. And that's when Father Amal said we can do research here, and 2 topics I had in mind. One was yoga and Carl Jung, about which I worked on, and the other one was Levinas on alterity. I had that in mind at that time. But Father Amal told me, look, before you enter into topic, look for the books available. At that time there was only 1 or 2 books at that time in Chennai, in the whole of Chennai. So because of which I went back to yoga and completed. Because very good advice that he gave is, before doing research, first ensure that you have the, in our humanities area, books is the most important thing. So I said first look into that, and I'm very thankful to the reader and also the presenter and also to the guide for giving me an opportunity to come back to Levinas after so many years. Of course, I had read some basics at that time, and I didn't have much to do at that time. But now, thanks to Father Matthew, since he recommended my name to one of the names for Viva, and thanks to Vice Chancellor, I got this opportunity to go through the thesis and also to listen to his exposition. In fact, his exposition was really made a lot of clarification to the doubts that I had while reading the thesis. It's a very good presentation. And of course, now coming to the real part of our examination, one of the foreign examiner has asked one question.